Everyone. Thank you so much for attending the second talk for the HCI Research Group. I'd like to introduce Dr. Patrizia Di Campli and Vito from the University of Glasgow, who will be giving her talk on from haptics to adaptive radio for people with dementia. Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, as Monica said, my name is Patrizia Di Campli and Vito, or Paddy for short, so feel free to say Paddy. I'm happy with that. And yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about my research journey, more or less, where I started up with like haptics through my PhD, and then I'm talking a bit about my current project, which is on adaptive radio for people with dementia. But because it's ongoing, obviously, I'll tell you where we are right now and what we want to do. But it's going to be maybe a bit more about the haptic things. So first, a few words maybe about myself. So I get my bachelor's and master's degree in media informatics at the University of Ulm in Germany. So media informatics basically is computing science, but with a bit of a focus on human-computer interaction already. And then afterwards, I moved to Glasgow to do my PhD there. And I did that in the Glasgow Interactive Systems Section, and more precisely the Multimodal Interaction Group. After I finished my PhD last year, like beginning of last year, I officially finished. I started as a research assistant in a project called Enter, where we were looking at like early detection for an e-detection tool for early stage psychosis in the community. But I only stayed with that project for a couple of months before I moved to the RadioMe project, which I'm also going to talk a bit about today as a research associate. So my PhD was, I started in 2016, finished in 2021, and it was an IKIS, an EPRC IKIS award. So I was co-funded by Jaguar Land Rover, and I was looking at the investigation of thermal feedback for in-car applications. And as I said, at the University of Glasgow in the Multimodal Interaction Group, which is basically Steve Brewster's group in there. My second supervisor was Frank Pollock from the Department of Psychology in Glasgow. And well, thermal feedback in the car, why? So I'm going to talk a bit about the motivation and then talk a bit about what it is that I did there. So first, in modern cars, there's a lot of information that is presented to drivers, but most of that information is visually. So you have loads of icons in the car, you have like a center console with loads of information in the car, which gets the people to look away from the main road and kind of look at all these icons, look at all these visual feedback. But the problem is that actually eyes off the road time is one of the main contributors to crashes and near crashes, right? So we don't want that. We want people to look at the forward road when they're driving. So very often audio feedback is used to kind of counteract the visual feedback, but that is not always desirable. Sometimes you have like, you're listening to radio shows. If you're anything like me, you listen to loud music, and then having some navigation system scream at you in the middle of a song can be really distracting. Sometimes it's also just not feasible. You might be in like a noisy environment. You might not hear anything. Or you have deaf drivers who can't use any kind of audio feedback in the car at all. So you could use haptic feedback for that. Haptic feedback is great. And vibrotractile feedback has been investigated for in-car feedback quite a bit. So there's quite a bit on that. And it's already in cars nowadays. But the problem is sometimes it can be masked by vibration around the car. So for example, imagine you have a super bumpy road, you're standing there just being, rattled through, and now you're supposed to feel any vibration on the steering wheel on top of that for feedback. Might be hard. So I was like, okay, why not thermal feedback, another haptic feedback, right? It's already been investigated before I started my PhD for like mobile devices. They had like high accuracy for detection, especially of the direction of temperature change. So if something is warming or is cooling, and things like subjective intensity, which is basically how fast and how much is it warming and cooling. So I was like, let's look at that. And also it has been shown to be independent of noisy and bumpy environments. So yeah, let's look at thermal feedback in the car, right? So to get started with this, my first two experiments were basically looking at what happens when you just start presenting thermal feedback to people who are driving. So I wanted to see, does it influence their driving behavior, and how well can they actually identify anything while they are driving and concentrating on driving. So we did like driving simulator studies, like all the studies from my PhD were driving simulator studies, because thermal feedback, you don't know how people react to, you can't send them on the road. You have no idea what's going to happen, right? So for this very first experiment, I was looking at a lane change task. I give like feedback on one hand, and when the participants felt a warming sensation, then I wanted them to change one lane to the right. When it was cooling, one lane to the left, to see how well can they feel it and how is the lane deviation for that. And then in the second experiment, I was actually looking at different cue designs that you can do. So I decided on one from previous literature for the first experiment to get like the basics of like what are the simplest things we can do here. And for the second experiment, we were varying the length of the feedback, how much, like we had two different extents of feedback, so like a change of 3 and of 6 degrees. And we were looking at different ways to go back to the neutral temperature, because that is one thing you have to keep in mind with thermal feedback is you have to start somewhere and you have to go back, because you cannot go up, 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 up. That can be dangerous, that can burn, it can be uncomfortable. So you kind of have to return to a neutral temperature in the end. So we were looking at different rates of change, how you can go back to the neutral temperature, mainly because one of the findings of the first study was that people kind of, if you remember here, like on the top side, you see how we kind of changed the temperature in the first place and how we went back to the neutral temperature looked similar here. So what people did was they were like, oh, it's warming, I'm going to the right lane. And then if that cue was going down back to the neutral temperature, they were like, oh, now it's cooling, I'm going back to the other lane. So they were just changing back and forth the lanes because they thought the return to neutral was a new cue, which we called false positives, right? And what we also found in our first experiment was that it takes longer for thermal feedback to be recognized than audio, which we expected, because the thermal sense is sluggish, very sluggish compared even to vibration. So it will always take a bit longer. But we also found like a number, it was under 2 seconds. It was like a 1.82 seconds that they took longer to change lanes in the thermal study, so like under 2 seconds, which is not too bad. And what we definitely found is thermal was rated as more complicated and uncertain. So people were never quite sure, is it changing now? I'm not sure. We still had fairly high recognition rates, as I said before, so it wasn't that bad. So it wasn't as bad for the recognition, but sometimes they weren't sure if they were feeling something when there was nothing. And then they wouldn't change because they weren't sure, but there's a level of uncertainty here. And it was rated as more complicated, which also makes a lot of sense if you think about it. So we expected that to some degree because we had an additional mapping in there. So when it was warming, they had to remember that warming means right, whereas in audio, which we compared it to, it would say right, obviously. So there's this additional step, which makes it more complicated overall. But and of course, it was a new feedback. So people were not familiar with this at all. So that would make it more complicated anyway. In the second design, what we were looking for with all these variations, we wanted to ideally find something that has a high accuracy, can easily be detected and interpreted, but has not these kind of returns to these false positives that they return to 0. And we could not find that. So there was the results were really all over the place. Some had a super high accuracy, but also a lot of false positives. Others had almost no false positives, but then also a terrible accuracy. So there was no one size fits all. So we would have to decide, is it okay to have false positives, or is it okay not to have a high accuracy for this? And what we also found, and this is interesting, is warm and cold stimuli could not simply be mirrored for the same effect. So if you had a feedback that had a high accuracy in warm, it might not have a high accuracy if you present the exact same cue, but like towards the cold. And the same with the false positives. It's really interesting. So as I said, a bit all over the place, but very interesting. And if you want to look at the results in more detail, so that you can see there are two papers published on these two studies. In the next step, we went towards a bit more against navigation and making it a bit more what we know, right? So we were using like turn-by-turn navigations. As you know, for navigation systems, we gave an indication, oh, please turn in 200 meters. And then when you came up to the turn, we were like, oh, you have to turn now. And we did that again in the first study, so in like experiment 3, we did that with thermal and audio to compare. And in the next study, we looked at thermal and cutaneous push, which is what you see up there where the pin comes out, which you don't see up there because the presentation is not running. So you can see in that other picture with like this bit of the steering wheel where there's this hole, that there's a pin coming out of this hole and kind of gently, gently tapping your hand when you use that. And so we were presenting something 200 meters before the turn, and that was like a temperature change, which went on for 5 seconds and then just stopped. And when you got towards the turning point, it turned on and then just stayed on until you actually made the turn. And in experiment 3, what we did was we presented both cold and warm stimuli. So on one side of the steering wheel, it would warm, and on the other side, it would cool. And we would ask the participants to turn towards the cold, towards the warm side. So we were presenting those two opposite temperatures because we thought that would make it more obvious which one is warming, which one is cooling, because the temperature would kind of move in the opposite direction. In the second experiment, we would only warm one side, because actually one of the things we found was that it was confusing if you did like the warming and the cooling. It did not help people to distinguish what is warming, what is cooling. But instead it was like, oh, there's something happening on both sides. Let me take a bit longer to realize which one is the warming side. So for the second experiment, that was one of the reasons why we only warmed one side in the second experiment. But the other reason is also so it's easier to compare to the cutaneous push feedback that we had, because we could present it at the exact same location of like in a similar way. And we wanted to see how does thermal feedback compare to another haptic feedback, because with audios, you would at least have like the same novelty effect, because people wouldn't know any of these. We found in the first experiment that we had high recognition rates. People were turning correctly most of the time, but still the rated thermal is more demanding. And sometimes they were uncertain if the hand, if there were actually the devices warming or if it was the hands warming because of the holding of the steering wheel. But what we also found in the second experiment, where we had this cutaneous push feedback that people actually loved, right? They really liked this tapping, which is interesting because former feedback and in former research where this was used, people did not like it very much. But here, people loved it. But what we had was like something we also did not see with audio. So you have these warnings 200 meters, and then the warning comes up close to the turning point. And then it means like the next upcoming turn. But if they were already like next to a road with a cutaneous push, they would sometimes try to get into that road, like really weird. Oh my God, it has to be this one. Really returning things, because it's so attention demanding, this tapping, that people are like, oh my God, it has to be this. So it was really interesting. We did not see any of that with thermal, not with audio, with anything. So this might be a bit dangerous in the car if this is something that is so attention grabbing that you stop thinking about does this kind of feedback make sense in this situation, right? This is also published in a Kai paper in 2019 if you want more information about this. Okay, so next we've moved on from navigation, and we're looking at information. We wanted to give information, and also moving on from looking at only thermal and started looking at thermal and vibration together. So in this experiment, we were looking at uni and bimodal notifications for 3 different levels of urgency. So we had thermal cues for urgency. So the more urgent the feedback was, the longer we would present the thermal feedback. And we were also still looking at warm and cold direction both. So you see up here like the 3 different ones. And in further vibration, we had 3 different levels where the more urgent the feedback is, the more pulses you have. So like d is not urgent, and d is urgent, right? And we had both. So in the bimodal condition where we were presenting both together, we started them both at the same time here. So this experiment had actually 2 parts to it. So in the first, we did not explain anything about the feedback. We're like, you're going to feel something. Here is a Likert scale from 0 to 100. How urgent does this feel? How urgent does it feel? So we're presenting all cues 3 times randomly pushed together, and then they all rated everything. for this. And then in the second part, it was identification of the three urgency levels. So we introduced all the cues to them before the second part, and then had them driving or doing random lane changes. And whenever they felt something, they were supposed to identify by pressing a corresponding button on the steering wheel to kind of see if they can identify the different urgency levels. So what we found in the first part was that thermal feedback was consistently rated as less urgent than vibration or bimodal feedback. So consistently rated a lot less urgent. And what we found in the identification, well, both parts actually, we found a high number of missed thermal cues for the very low ones, but they were very subtle, very short. So we kind of were expecting this. We wanted to make sure for these cues that vibration and thermal would be presented for the same amount of time, and we were basing our vibration on previous research. So we're trying to get these subtle ones in to specifically see if they can even be felt properly during driving. And no, they can't. What we also found, and this is interesting, was that the bimodal tactile cues had a longer recognition time than just vibration. So I said before, the thermal sense is a bit sluggish, so we kind of expected the thermal ones to be longer, but we did kind of expect that the bimodal ones with the vibration and the thermal at the same time, that kind of the main information would still be taken out of the vibration, but that the feeling of a temperature might make it feel more urgent, right? But actually, it kind of slowed the whole process of recognition. So actually, if you want something urgent, then putting thermal on top might not help to make it feel more urgent if you need like an immediate reaction to that. We did another experiment combining thermal and vibrotactile feedback, but this time we wanted to give like two different types of information together. So we were thinking about, imagine you get a message and you want to know, is it a work message or a private message, and is it important, like does it have high importance or low importance? We kind of wanted to convey this information. What we were looking at was like using thermal by itself and using the combination of thermal with vibration. We did not look at vibration by itself because there's lots of research on tactones and stuff where they looked at these kind of things. So we were concentrating on those two things. And what we used was like for the nature of the message, which is it work or private, we were using thermal feedback, specifically the direction of temperature change. So if the cue, whatever cue was warming, it was a private message. If it was cooling, it was a work message. Because the former research has found that warming sometimes gives you the feeling of home and things like that. So we wanted to use this kind of associations people had in the past for this. And for the thermal only cue, what we used for the importance was like the again a short presentation and a longer presentation of the cue. So the longer one is the more important one, the shorter one is the less important one here. What you can see in the middle thing, like you see up there, the graph for the thermal cues. The middle one is what we used for the bimodal version to present the nature of the message in the bimodal combination. And you can see that the kind of the same patterns have been used here for the importance for the vibrotactile cues that we used before, but like the two extremes of those. And in this experiment, we first presented vibration and then thermal feedback. So what we found here was that apart from this short warm cue, all the cues had really very high, all the thermal cues had really high recognition rates. Actually, all the cues had high, so not just the thermal, the bimodal, of course, as well. Really high recognition rate for all of them, apart from this one, the warm short one, and that had like 70%, and all the others were like around 90 or higher. And what we could also see, and that was really, really nice, the direction of temperature change was especially well recognized. So if it was warming or cooling, so the nature of the message was recognized really with like 98, 99%. Better than the recognition of the vibrotactile patterns. Those sometimes people missed out. But this mapping, warm personal, cold worked extremely well here. So if you have a good mapping for thermal feedback, that's something that people don't have to think about too much, it can be highly effective. That's what you could here see. And we asked people to rate what they thought was like the best, the most easily recognized cue, and they were all like, oh, bimodal was the easiest. but actually the best recognition rate, the thermal high cold one, so the thermal only one with a high importance in the cold direction, that was actually the best recognized one of all of them. So that was also really interesting that the perception was so off here, because most said like bimodal was definitely the best one. So if you want to know a bit more about that, it has been published in ICMI 2020, so feel free to kind of go and look a bit more at that. There's one more experiment in my PhD that I want to talk about just for a moment. So this was at an internship at JLR, like a Jaguar Land Rover, my co-founders. And we were looking at how can we help this transfer of control in a semi-autonomous car. So semi-autonomous, where you have like states where the driver is in control of the car and states where the car is actually in control of the driving, right? So you will always have a moment where you will give the control to the car as a driver, and where you have to take back the control from the car. So we wanted to help these kind of moments. So there was like a visual progress bar that was kind of indicating how long it will take until the control is given. And you gave the control by kind of pressing both gear pedals, as you can see in the picture, both gear pedals at the same time for 2 seconds. You keep them pulled, and then the control is kind of transferred in one direction or the other. So what we were doing is like we added these thermal cues there, and also a vibrotactile cue. So we were trying to kind of get the information of the visual progress bar out of the visual again and into the haptics by presenting this temperature change. So when we were giving the control to the car, it became colder, again, like the machine bit colder, right? So when the temperature was cooling, we gave the control to the car. We kind of heated up the devices when the control was taken back from the car. And at the end of the transfer, after the 2 seconds, we had a short vibration to be like, control done, transfer is done now, okay? And we also had a vibrotactile actuator on the accelerator pedal to kind of make sure, hey, you don't have to leave your foot here now because the car is in control, or you have to use this now. And we tested that with and without the visual progress bar to see if the thermal cue could kind of replace this visual progress bar. And we found out, no, it could not. So it's not enough to show this. But what we actually saw still with the bimodal tactile modality actually improved the driving behavior. So we had less lane deviation when we added the bimodal feedback, which is super nice. But actually people reported that the vibration was the thing that really helped them. So they were looking more out for the vibration, the thermal feedback itself. They said, no, sometimes they didn't feel it. Other times they were like, oh, I can feel something, but I don't really care. So it was not enough to kind of take this information out, and people were still looking at the visuals. People are very attached to their visual feedback apparently here. But it was still good to know that actually it improved driving behavior. That is awesome. So this was published as a late-breaking work, late-breaking or work in progress. I don't remember what it's called at the moment at Auto-UI 2020. So if you want some more information on that, you can have a look at it. So this was basically what I did in my PhD. And well, after my PhD, now I started in this RadioMe project. So this is my current project that I'm working on. It's called RadioMe. It's a EPRIC funded, and it's a collaboration with like the University of Plymouth, where we have music computation and dementia experts, the Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, where we have music therapists, and us in Glasgow with the HCI part of it. And the project started in 2019 and is expected to go until 2023, but because of COVID, we probably will extend it. But I joined like in the middle of it, so I only joined last year in August. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. So RadioMe is not really telling you anything, so I'm going to talk about where we are settled. So we're going to the adaptive radio for people with dementia here, right? And the motivation for this whole project is that obviously, you have an increasing population of older people. The proportion is getting higher and higher. And with that, obviously, we will also have an increase and kind of illnesses like people like dementia, which predominantly kind of has influence on the older population. So currently, we have about 55 million people, but it's actually expected to go up to like 139 million in 2050. And people with dementia, like other older adults, they prefer to age in their own home. Actually being in this familiar surroundings helps them deal with their conditions, and also that makes them feel empowered. They want to feel independent, but because of the illness they cannot. But it helps them being at home and being able to kind of make day-to-day decisions by themselves. But the problem is that people with dementia often struggle with the activities of daily living, and that gets them frustrated, understandably, and agitated. So what we want to do with the RadioMe project is we want to go into the home of people with mild dementia, so mild dementia where they still can live at home, and we want to kind of work with them there to make them feel better in their home and be able to stay longer in their own home. So older people very, very much like to listen to the radio, so we want to take advantage of that and want to kind of present radio to them through our system and be able to enrich the radio with reminders that you can set in a calendar app. So the carer, informal carer, or the person with dementia possibly could set themselves the reminders, which would be embedded into the radio stream directly. So you have radio, and suddenly you have a boom. Oh, don't forget to water the plants. Boom, and radio goes on, something like that. And also, what we want to do is we want to help people with dementia when they get agitated. So for that, we want to give them a wearable device, a smartwatch, to kind of monitor the heart rate that they have, then have a system like a machine learning algorithm detect through the heart rate if they're agitated. And when we detect that they're agitated, we want to play calming music for them. This is music that they have a personal relationship with, that is found out with like the people, with the music therapist, finding these music with them, something that they can reminisce with, things like that, that we can then embed into the radio stream to calm them down in the situation. So a real-time intervention when we detect agitation through radio. So that is the idea of RadioMe, which is pretty awesome, I think. Amazing idea. So where we are right now. So the University of Plymouth have already worked on a machine learning model that analyzes the radio stream that comes in. So they record the radio stream and kind of analyze when is music being played, when is someone talking, when someone is talking or music is being played, when do pauses occur, because that is then used if a reminder is coming up. So we're coming to the time when a reminder should be displayed. They're like, oh, when is a good time to actually present that? You don't want to kind of blur out a reminder if there's like someone in the middle of a sentence or something. So they detect a break where they can kind of make a cut, present a reminder, and then afterwards, with a bit of the delay of obviously of the message, they will just go on with the radio stream as if nothing had happened, right? And the same kind of for the music, kind of finding a good moment to change the music, but it's a bit more immediate for that, of course, because people would be agitated and you would kind of want them to get this calming intervention as soon as possible. So there's a bit less flexibility there as with the reminders. And that is already working. We had just a demo yesterday about that, where this was nicely working, so really cool. And on the other side, we are still working on the smart app of kind of getting the heart rate data to the computer. So we want to use Wi-Fi for that, so people can walk around in their own home. And we still get the heart rate data. So at the moment we're at the demo stage. It has to be a bit adapted. So it's working, but it has to be adapted so we can use it with people with dementia a bit. And we're still working on the data collection for the agitation detection. So that is also in progress. We have data, because of COVID-19, we could not have access to people with dementia. So we have a bit of data with older healthy adults in stress situations, which is labeled and which we are building our current model on, but we need more data for that model also to get better. And we definitely need more data from people with dementia in stressful situations. But obviously we cannot just go in and be like, let's do a stress test with you, because that's unethical. They don't know what's happening. You cannot just stress them out. So we kind of have to find ways to get stressed, like heart rate data from stressed people with dementia. So we're in that stage currently, where we want to go into assisted living homes and ask if they could wear heart rate data, and the carers maybe label if an agitation event occurs naturally in there. We want to go and talk to people who are doing like cognitive tests with people with dementia, because that is also stressful with them. So we can maybe get the heart rate data while they do that and work with that in the future. And yeah, that is basically where we are right now. And that's also then the end of my talk now. So I have loads of references for you here that you can see here. And this is me now. Thank you. Guess I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Patty. Are there any questions from anyone? Yeah, sure, go on.
Yes, this means I see a lot of picture. You have test in that laboratory, but however, in real scenario, if you drive car, you see temperature, because in summer, its temperature is very high, because in your physical, it's not just in physical, I feel very hot, but actually it's just 30 degrees. 30 degrees. And sometimes you see it's very cold, it's just 28. I think in some real between laboratory in the real sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So so one of the things that we did here overall for the thermal feedback, so we have this neutral temperature. So the devices are set to a specific temperature that then your skin adapts to. So the neutral range of the skin is somewhere between 30 and 36. So if you have a temperature between that neutral zone, actually it will, after a short moment, it will not feel warm or cold in any way. So we kind of adapt the skin to that temperature before we cool or heat up anything. So this specific skin temperature is independent of like if you feel warm or cold, to kind of detect if the temperature is changing up or down. Overall, the idea, and I've already been doing some work with students in that direction, is that you just, as a base temperature, you just take like the skin temperature that you have right now and go up and down from that. So it would also be dependent on the specific person. So you have a temperature sensor where you get the skin temperature and then adapt the devices to that temperature. So you can then make the changes from up and down from there. So that would also kind of, with that, you would also kind of take into account how warm or hot you feel at the moment on the skin level. But there's also a difference between like body temperature inside and the skin temperature. There is like a difference between that. So the interaction is not as much as you might think.
Thank you. I think Chidam had a question. Chidam?
Yes.
Hello, thanks for your talk. This question, I hope you are hearing me well.
Yes, we hear you.
This question is going to be about the last project you presented. I've been thinking a lot about in another project about using smart devices, especially in healthcare context with various demographics, including older adults. And one thing that I was wondering, the radio is an excellent medium, I think, which is aligned very well to what people are used to. But I was wondering how it is integrated further into a home system, because I'll just explain where my thinking comes from. Once a reminder is given, you don't necessarily have a feedback on whether it's been acted on. That's one of the things. And how do you ascertain that that's being acted on? The other thing is, this happens to me as well. I get the reminder, I go to the other room and I forget why did I come here for sometimes.
Yeah.
Basically,
I know that.
And then you feel like you need a reminder for the reminder. Oh yes, I especially in busy homes like me where a 4-year-old may grab your attention and you forgot where you even switch rooms in the first place, and it's the only older adults need a little bit mental jog. So I was curious how this is further embedded into a system, or are there any plans in your project to do so?
So in our project at the moment, it's not, but it's an excellent point to think about. But so this is already ambitious. For like getting these, we still, as I said, it's estimated. We want it to be done. The project was planned to end in like October next year. But the models are not up yet, and we haven't really tried. So what we really want is something that we can then put into the home of people with dementia and see what kind of effect does it have. And we just had a project meeting yesterday, and it's like, there's still a bit to do. So we'll see where we get. So we're not currently not thinking to add more, but you're absolutely right. Those are things that would be the next step once the system is running, to kind of integrate the context and see what were people doing around that, and how well could they work with that, and also thinking about how to integrate it into the homes. That is something that we only now start thinking about. So I haven't got a good answer for that, but you're absolutely right. That is something to think about and to keep in mind, and that would be then the next step to kind of look at that. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any more questions? Yes, I don't want to put pressure.
Yes.
Yeah, I got two questions really. The first one has to do with the first project. In terms of, I think you already asked the contextual aspect of that in terms of the temperature, how do you determine the inside and outside. I'm just thinking, I mean, in your project, did you consider the human sort of cognitive aspect in terms of me being tested and what I thought? That I'm expecting that something is going to get warm. I don't even know sort of whether that sort of human dimension was sort of how was that integrated into the project? So
basically, the expectations of the people, or the more in the direction of cognitive flow.
Yeah, the expectation is one. As much as human, we sometimes tend to respond to stimuli, the way how we assuming something is going to happen, so I'm prepared to respond. Right, rather than something happen naturally.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm just thinking, I mean, putting people in the kind of control our environment, whether it's something that you compare, having people doing something natural without expecting anything at all. Right? And those that are tested, they're expecting something.
Yeah, so yeah, I know what you mean. So you remember this one experiment where we weren't explaining the cues and just wanted to know, you feel this for the first time now, tell us how urgent it feels, to kind of get the idea of, like, is there a difference between urgency from the cues that we expected to see or that we designed for, to actually see, do they react the way that we designed the cues, right? We did it in that experiment. For the others, we were more explaining things because it was such a new concept for most of them, that is like, you have to do some explaining with that, I think, because that most of the people have never done anything with thermal feedback. So it's like, this is going to warm up, how is this going to warm up? And then they put their hand, it's like, oh, this is cool. And you get these reactions, even if they know that it's warming or cooling. The way that that these Peltier elements, so like the thermoelectric devices, the way how they warm and cool and how fast it is, we can go up to like 3 degrees per second. People are then suddenly, wow, whoa, this is cool, wow. So you get these kind of reactions. And I think it's interesting to see, like, for mapping, so for getting mappings to kind of be like, oh, what would you associate with this? I think you would have to have this kind of really new one. This is like, this is the first time you feel this. What is this kind of feeling? But for us, when we had like design cues and we were trying to kind of have a very precise interpretation of this, I think it's hard to do it without any kind of explanation beforehand. But yeah, I agree. It's like, it's really cool to see the reactions from people without them like explaining anything beforehand. It's really, really cool. But where we wanted to kind of see how can we use it in this very specific context, that I think it's a bit harder there. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested in what, actually I'm going to follow on the thermal feedback questions, what the thermal feedback is best used for. So this is about how do you map the qualities of that feedback, and how would you recommend you map the qualities of that feedback to some kind of target feature or thing that you're trying to achieve through the interaction design? Do you have any guidance on where that would be?
So that is a super hard question because so there's been research. So I have one example. Graham Wilson, who's also working at Glasgow University, he has done research with thermal feedback before me, and one of the things that he did was using it for security, or like, yeah, security of web pages, basically. So first there was like a question that I was sending around, like, oh, if you have a web page and that web page is not secure, would you want warm or cold feedback? And people were like, "Ooh, it's not safe, so definitely cold feedback," because that would kind of be it's like a not good feedback. Cold does feel like not being good, right? And then he did like a lab study where they actually felt the temperature, and they were like, ooh, warm, definitely warm is danger. So the warm should be the one being used. So you have these very different reactions to the thing, and it really very much depends on what you use it for. If like the warm or the cold, for example, is the better one. There has been research where people have looked at different kind of pictures and were presenting the temperatures with the pictures, and were kind of looking at what are people saying with this. And it's like they were presenting it with food, or they were looking at recommendations for restaurants or something like that, without having any additional context. And the same restaurant gets the other, like both directions, because some people are like, oh, this is a cool place. I like this place. So cool, cold, obviously. And others were like, oh, this is a friendly place. So warm, of course, because warm is friendly. So you have, it has to be really precise. This mapping can be really tricky. That is why we wanted to use it for urgency, because people in the past have said danger is warm. So like, oh, it's urgency, then also warm, or isn't it? So it's really kind of hard, even if this like things that seem so connected can be interpreted really differently. But if you have the mapping right, then it can be very very unanimous. So like then if you have this mapping, like for example with the nature of the message with the work and private, when you have found the thing that people agree on, it's everyone agrees on it. You know what I mean? It's a bit hard to explain what I mean, but if you found it, it's amazing. But to find it, you have to test a lot and have to be very sure what it is. Does that help you?
No, I'm really fascinated by that, because there isn't a clear mapping. Actually, one of the things that comes out from your data is actually it is the discrimination of heat difference that people seem to have a common kind of understanding of. You know, suddenly hot to cold, that's a shift. Mm-hmm. Whereas one of those kind of polarities is difficult to interpret, and actually mapping those to a thing, a feature or control is hugely problematic.
Yeah, but again, I mean, again, so if you have something like I had in the very first experiment, was like warm is right. It's like quite random. You have to remember, right? But I think that in this one experiment where warm was private and cold was work, that is something you said it once. They were like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and then they remembered. Whereas even the vibration pattern that have been shown in the past to work quite well in this direction, that like more is more important, more urgent, and slower ones is not. They mix that up a lot as well. But this work cold, this is like, oh yeah, this makes sense. This is now in my head. This works.
Brilliant.
Okay, are there any more questions?
Yeah, RadioMe.
Yes,
RadioMe,
okay. Question. Yes.
Yeah, I find that fascinating. I've just been thinking, really, as you discussing, not in terms of the radio providing the reminder, but in terms of how you integrate the AI part of it, right, to detect some form of mood, then send that reminder to someone or play cool music for that person. I'm just thinking, I mean, how are you going to account for that mood? Because you talk about the heart rate.
Yes.
Is that the only data you're going to use?
So
you
right.
Use anything like cameras or other sensors, any other thing?
So right now we wanted to see. The first step is trying to see if heart rate is enough. Okay. So that is we can probably use heart rate to get some kind of agitation, like something where, let's say we get probably more the arousal than any valence. So we don't know if someone is excited, it might also be similar. So one of the other things that we were thinking about is taking steps. So because that agitated people with dementia often like walk around a lot. So we might integrate that. But we were trying to kind of use something that we definitely can use with this watch, ideally, because we need something in real time. In most other, if you can buy some kind of sensors, you can download the data at the end of the day, but you use as a person cannot, or you have an app that you can look at, but you don't get the data in real time. And we need that for our system. So we were like thinking, first of all, the watch is something that would probably work well with people with dementia, because then the other thing is, if you give them some weird sensors, at some point they're like, what is this? I don't want to wear this. But if it's a watch and they're used to watches, then it's more likely that they just keep it on. Oh, look, it's a watch. Yeah, I get the time. Fine. You know, so there are a couple of constraints here that we have to work with, and we'll try to kind of use what we can get to make this as the best way we can. So I guess step count or accelerometer is pretty good as an addition. So we're gonna put that in soon. That is my work for the next month.
Step count makes sense because when they're confused as well, they walk a lot.
Exactly.
Indicator of something.
Yeah, exactly. And as we heard yesterday from the music therapist, is also something but which they can work with, because with music therapy, they explained yesterday in our project meeting that one of the things you do as a music therapist, if you want to use music to calm people, is kind of to get them from where they are. So basically, if they walk around a lot, you take this kind of rhythm and then get slower from there and take them with you, which I really liked how they explained that yesterday. So even that could give them an indication, the step count, an indication of the rhythm of like how fast, from where do you start and get slower, and kind of take them with you to calm them.
I mean, I'm really fascinated because when it comes, particularly to determining people's mood, how they feel, right? You are not there. I mean,
yeah.
You know, I mean, the wearables, of course, if you work, I mean, that is, in terms of, you have to think about the context, right, in which you sort of design, and what is also culturally acceptable.
Yeah.
I mean, given, these are people with dementia, they have a specific illness.
Yeah.
Right. Anyway, I think it's. I mean, the idea for me, I like the idea really in terms of combining the review and the reminder and play that music to calm people.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, one of the things in the second, let me just say this, Mark. One of the other things is also like with this project, the beauty of it is, it's an intervention that doesn't really have many downsides, right? If you detect correctly, that is great. We present music. If it's wrong, if we don't catch it at agitation, then it's the normal case as they always had it. There's no negative outcome from what they have without the system. And if we play music when they're actually not agitated, then we play music they like. It's like there's probably no downside to that either. So this is something where even if the system doesn't work at all, there's probably not going to be a lot of problem with that. You know what I mean? That's good. Yes. Okay. So Mark was first, I think.
Yeah. So I was just going to comment on that because I think people have, and just thinking of my own behavior, and I'm fortunate not to suffer from dementia, as far as I know. I quite like to get angry sometimes. You know, I like to have those emotional bursts. I don't want to be kept on a physical version of a chemical kosh. You know, I don't want to be kept at a equilibrium level. I like that humanity is my ability to be a human is about having a range of experiences and not always being on a kind of level, flat, completely controlled thing. And I know this is probably jumping far too far for the technology, but I think there's also a potential where you're trying to keep people at a, when I'm really paid off with someone, I don't want to have calming classical music being played to me. It's like when you're really angry because you know that something's gone wrong and your person you're having an argument with, calm down. It just makes you get even more enraged.
Yeah.
And I wonder how you can moderate the system so that those kinds of things are enabled rather than pacified.
Yeah, so I mean, the thing here is that the point in which these this kind of intervention is the most desirable is when you have people with dementia who are basically alone at home right now. So because those are the moments where it really does harm. If they are alone and they're super agitated, it's not about like a healthy anger, but it's something that can really endanger them in some way. So that is when we want that, because then if they're alone at home and they're agitated and they're confused and they don't know what to do about getting better, those are the moments when, if we can calm them down until someone can be there or is there, that is like the ideal setting for what we want to do. But we were also discussing this yesterday. I mean, so I don't know about you, but for me personally, so I'm just also speculating here. But for me personally, when I'm angry, when I'm really properly angry, I'm not sure. It will take a while for me to for music to calm me down. But if I'm agitated, so I'm personally always thinking about agitation more as like I worry about something, right? That is a very different state than proper anger. So we'll see what happens when we put in the homes, but we did have this conversation, we did have this discussion as well. But I guess for what we're aiming for is more like people still in their home in a really vulnerable state, where we can help them feel better. That is kind of the goal. Okay. Then yeah. Please.
I was going to make a similar comment regarding how much control the person can still have on these devices. Sometimes I completely agree with Mark. Sometimes I feel like we're not allowed to have certain emotions and there is an automated intervention already taking place. And I was wondering whether a step again, maybe beyond what you planned for the project, is to have a limited kind of a smart speaker kind of functionality where it's a two-way conversation rather than something is thrown at you as a solution. You get like, you seem agitated. Is this music helping? You know, it's like you get into this kind of conversational mode and you're like, no, just leave me alone. I'm angry. And then you stop in trying to intervene and let them live the emotion. And if it's like, yes, thank you, I'm agitated, I would like to call my ex, and then it, the system integration, I think a step beyond is going to be very, very useful for this type of thing. The other thing I was thinking of when you mentioned the watch as a wearable, again, from my very preliminary studies and my own observations as well, is that it seems like giving options to people is the best way to go, because sometimes these elderly people are very, very tied to their watch they've been wearing for 20 years and they don't want to remove it and replace it with something else. And then it might be a brooch, it might be something else they could be willing to put on, but they would not, replace something that they've been already wearing. So trying to cut, customization, I guess, which is, of course, doesn't scale, but something that would be worthy of consideration in these type of settings.
Yep, thank you. Very good comment. Definitely, that would also be part of the next step. What else can we use for this? Actually, one cool thing that I just wanted to add before we have to stop is I was at a workshop in Glasgow, Technologies for Brain Health and Dementia Prevention workshop in Glasgow, and there I met someone who was using socks to get heart rate and temperature and TSR data. And I'm like, socks, awesome. Most of the time we wear them, people know them, awesome. So maybe something like that is great.
This is something used for babies at the moment as well. There are babies, socks for babies to track health issues. Yeah, and awesome. I thought that was brilliant as well. Yeah,
that is great. Yeah, that's great. So probably just time for one more question if there's one, but then we have to stop.
Okay.
Oh. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Patty.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone online.
See you. Bye. Bye. Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Oh.
To the others.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, they're gone. Oh, there they are. Oh, sorry. Bye.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Chidem. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.